Trump assassination attempt is likely the major story of all of 2024. Mexico has sued gun manufacturers for making weapons that the cartels are illegally smuggling into Mexico. A court just nailed Hillary for FEC violations 45 times bigger than Trump's. This is Dr. David D. Schein in this special episode of Saving America with our weekly update. Here are some of the top stories from the last week. Trump assassination attempt is likely the major story of all of 2024. It probably will dwarf the election itself. This was the first time since 1981 when Ronald Reagan was seriously hurt with a couple gunshot wounds. And of course, sadly, one of his aides who was with him was badly hurt. But this is something that doesn't happen in the United States very often. In fact, some of the reviews of what happened historically is it's an unusual event, but sadly it does underscore the concerns that we have about growing political divide in this country, and also, frankly, the growing threat of violence. Obviously, the shooter himself is solely responsible to America and God for what he did. However, the attempt on Trump, the murder of Corey Comparatore, age 50, the serious injuries to David Dutch, age 57, and James Copenhaver, 74, demand that the parties responsible for security be held accountable. The latest is that the U.S. Secret Service is blaming local police for the failure to guard access to the tall building that the shooter used. However, local police are now saying that it's quite the opposite situation, that they were only responsible, their 7 officers were only responsible for traffic control, basically saying that the Secret Service or the FBI is lying. Interesting, folks. It's time for people to get fired over this catastrophic failure like this. To make matters even more like a TV drama, a remote detonator was found next to the Trump shooter, and the authorities found improvised explosive devices in the car of the shooter near the rally. Had he not been shot dead after he fired the first 4 rounds, this could have been much worse, folks. Again, in an area where there are 50, unknown number of people in the stadium where this was happening, hundreds or thousands could have been badly injured. Days later, a motive for the shooting and even the possible bombing is not known. Reports about him are similar to other mass shooters. A loner with a few friends. Quiet, did not fit in. Sad situation, and I do express my condolences to all of the parties involved in this, and frankly, including the parents who I'm sure miss their son. And reportedly, the parents did call authorities that day prior to the shooting. Now, I don't have more information on that, but they may have been trying to head off the sad situation that did occur. Ignoring warnings, Beijing escalates aggression against the Philippines. China continues its aggression toward U.S. ally, the Philippines. It has harassed ships in waters controlled by the Philippines. All international authorities agree that those are Philippine waters. A more assertive and present U.S. force in the White House and overseas would likely have prevented this very dangerous situation from even developing. Remember, both world wars were started involving countries other than the other major powers being attacked. Third countries are being attacked by major powers, and then the other major powers step in to defend those countries sooner or later, resulting in involvement of many parties around the world and an incredible death toll. Gun manufacturers asked the U.S. Supreme Court to block Mexico's $10 billion lawsuit against them. I've recently criticized Mexico for continuing its decline with a new president who's even further left than the previous one. The Mexican government has lost control of its borders, and it is not maintaining control and providing security for its people or for Americans. Instead of taking responsibility for this, the scumballs in Mexico tried to file a lawsuit that claimed U.S. companies were intentionally undermining Mexico's tough gun laws by making military-style assault weapons. And these, of course, are finding their way to the drug cartels and the other criminals in Mexico. Well, in the first round, U.S. District Judge F. Dennis Saylor in Massachusetts, which is not necessarily a big pro-gun state, dismissed the case. Judge Saylor found that the Federal Prosecution of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, the PLCAA of 2005, and I quote, unequivocally bars lawsuits seeking to hold gun manufacturers responsible for the acts of individuals using guns for their intended purpose. The PLCAA was enacted to protect the industry from frivolous lawsuits like this one filed by Mexico. But in January 2024, an anti-American three-judge panel of the First Circuit Court of Appeals reversed, returning the case to the district court. And that meant that the lawsuit could then proceed again. However, the gun makers have now gone to SCOTUS to have the case thrown out, and I do expect that the current Supreme Court will throw the case out. Folks, in turn, I think the United States needs to file a $10 trillion action against Mexico for allowing the cartels to flourish, preventing a threat to all U.S. citizens. Mexico has allowed the cartels to engage in drug dealing, human trafficking, and an untold number of terrorists to cross through its border and cause harm to the United States. It's hard to estimate the harm that Mexico's failed state has allowed to be caused in the United States. On the domestic front, Elon Musk is moving SpaceX and Twitter X headquarters from California to Texas. This is not a surprise, as Musk recently moved Tesla to Texas from California and changed the state of incorporation from Delaware to Texas for SpaceX. My question is, why has it taken this long, and when will other companies join Musk and his companies? California has continued its insane efforts to drive businesses out of the state. California has gone from a budget surplus to a large deficit in just a few years. It will not get better until they are so broke that the few folks left with brains take over the state and dramatically change its anti-business, anti-civilization policies. In more good news for the business community, a Baltimore court dumped a climate change case against 26 oil companies. This stupid case was filed by the city of Baltimore, claiming that the major oil companies did not do enough to control the impact on the environment of their energy products. Sadly, this case has been pending, get this, since 2018. The court ultimately held, and I quote, "The Constitution's federal structure does not allow the application of state law to claims like those presented by Baltimore." So that's, like I said, some good news, but it should have taken far less time than 6 years. The Dems are dumping Biden in large numbers. I just note that Biden's handlers, who are really running the show, and his family do not want to give up the reins. However, the number of Dem office holders and donors who want to dump him has grown rapidly. I believe the phrase is, "What have you done for me lately?" His backers only back him to get something from him and his administration. I have seen not one serious concern about his personal lifespan or his mental decline. In a silly effort to shore up support, the puppet masters and their flunkies are making a move to make Biden the official nominee of the Democrats before the end of July. The continued failure of the bureaucratic state is documented by the rising cost of Obamacare. Folks, these are some really scary numbers. I note that during the first 2 years of the Trump administration, this fraud on the people should have been repealed, but it wasn't. It was a failure of the GOP that this act still exists. The federal subsidies are, of course, out of control as expected. The Congressional Budget Office, which is supposedly neutral, estimated in its revised 10-year budget forecast that these subsidies would cost $1.3 trillion over the next decade, and expansion of Medicare will cost another incredible $1.4 trillion. Folks, we're already broke. Where is this money going to come from? Speaking of bureaucratic failures, the Postal Service is increasing stamp prices for the second time this year. The USPS will increase the benchmark first-class stamp by 5 cents from 68 cents to 73 cents. The additional ounce price for single-piece letters will increase from 24 cents to 28 cents. I call on all citizens to see my article in the American Thinker from last summer titled "End the Postal Service Con Job." There is zero reason for this operation to price its critical services out of touch for the poorest American. It is government subsidizing the junk mail industry. That's plain and simple. It's also government competing with private industry. If they're not competitive, they ought to get the heck out of the business. Speaking of two-faced justice, which we've seen a lot of in the last couple of years, a court just nailed Hillary for FEC violations 45 times bigger than Trump's 130,000 so-called violation. So what happened to one of my least favorite people in America? Almost nothing. Why is she not in a federal pen for the rest of her life? Why is she not losing everything she owns? Well, clearly the Dems presently run the justice system. There's nothing called equal justice. The Washington, D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled Tuesday that the 2016 Hillary Clinton campaign and an affiliated super PAC violated federal election law in spending that totaled close to $6 million. Compare that with Trump's 130,000. This is more than 45 times greater. And the accusation is the same: misreporting business records during the same 2016 campaign. Note that the FEC, Federal Election Commission, and the Justice Department looked at the Trump case and refused to prosecute. And that, of course, did not stop the scum in New York from prosecuting Trump and going after him and, of course, pursuing criminal charges and jail and so forth. And in the meantime, the Clinton campaign just rolls along. Folks, not a good idea as a way to run a country. George Allen Kelly, age 75, was accused of murder for protecting his property. He was charged with second-degree murder, but the trial resulted in a hung jury after 2 full days of jury deliberations. The judge declared a mistrial. The prosecution has announced it will not retry the case. I feel badly that this gentleman had to go through this process. I want to be clear. Murder is never okay. However, killing to protect yourself and your family or innocent members of the public is a right all Americans should have. Prior to trial, note that Kelly rejected an agreement with prosecutors to plead guilty to negligent homicide. So Mr. Kelly stuck to his guns, no pun intended, and it turned out okay for him. This is Dr. David D. Schein for Saving America. Please subscribe on your favorite platform.